My name is Sarah, and this happened last winter when I was 17 years old. I had just gotten my driver's license a few months earlier, and I was trying to save up money for a car. My parents said if I could save half the amount, they would help me with the rest. So I was picking up babysitting jobs whenever I could, mostly for families in my neighborhood who knew me from church or from school. It was the second week of December, and I remember it being really cold that year. We had already gotten snow twice, which was unusual for our area. Everyone was getting ready for Christmas, and there were lights going up on almost every house on my street. I was actually starting to enjoy the holiday season for the first time in a while, because I was making decent money and feeling independent. One afternoon after school, my mom told me that a woman named Mrs. Henderson had called asking if I was available to babysit on Friday night. I didn't recognize the name at first. My mom explained that Mrs. Henderson was someone she had met at a work function and that they lived out on Maple Ridge Road, which was on the very edge of town where the houses were more spread out and sat on bigger properties. The job seemed simple enough. Mrs. Henderson needed someone to watch her two kids, Emma who was 5 and Jacob who was 8, while she and her husband went to a Christmas party. She said they would be gone from 6 p.m. until around midnight. When my mom told me they were offering $150 for the night, I immediately said yes. That was way more than I usually made. Most families paid me like $10 or $12 an hour. This was almost double that. I remember feeling excited about it. $150 would get me a lot closer to my car goal. I didn't think twice about the location or the fact that I had never met this family before. My mom had talked to Mrs. Henderson and everything seemed fine, so I figured it would be just like any other babysitting job I had done. Friday came around and I finished my last class around 2:30. I went home, did some homework, ate an early dinner, and then started getting ready. I packed my backpack with my phone charger, some snacks, my biology textbook in case I had time to study, and a book I was reading for English class. I also threw in a hoodie because my mom said the house was pretty far out and it might be cold. Around 5:30, I got in my mom's car and she drove me out to Maple Ridge Road. I didn't have my own car yet, obviously, so she said she would pick me up when the Hendersons got home. The drive took almost 20 minutes, which surprised me. I didn't realize how far out they lived. We passed the main part of town, then the shopping plaza, then the area where most of the neighborhoods were, and eventually we were on a long stretch of road with only a few houses scattered here and there. The sun was already setting by the time we pulled into their driveway. It got dark so early in December. The house was massive. It was a 2-story colonial-style home with a big front porch and tall windows. There were Christmas lights strung along the roofline, but they weren't turned on yet. The property had a lot of trees around it, which made it feel even more isolated. I could barely see the nearest neighbor's house through the woods. My mom pulled up to the front and told me to text her if I needed anything. I grabbed my backpack and walked up to the front door. Before I could even knock, Mrs. Henderson opened it with a big smile. She was dressed really nicely, like she was going to a fancy event, in a dark green dress and heels. She looked maybe in her late 30s, with blonde hair pulled back in a bun. She welcomed me in and immediately started talking fast, like she was in a hurry. The inside of the house was just as impressive as the outside. The entryway had high ceilings and a giant chandelier. Everything looked expensive and very clean, almost too clean, like a house from a magazine. She walked me through the main floor quickly, showing me the living room, the kitchen, and the downstairs bathroom. The kids were in the living room watching a Christmas movie. Emma, the 5-year-old, had curly brown hair and was wearing pajamas with snowflakes on them. Jacob, the 8-year-old, barely looked up from the TV. He had dark hair and glasses. Mrs. Henderson told them to say hi to me, and they both gave small waves but didn't seem very interested. Mrs. Henderson walked me into the kitchen and started going over the schedule. She talked really fast, and I had to focus to keep up with everything she was saying. She said the kids had already eaten dinner, so I just needed to give them a small snack if they asked for one. Bedtime was 8 p.m. for Emma and 8:30 for Jacob. She pointed to a list on the refrigerator that had their bedtime routine written out, along with emergency numbers and the address of the house. Then she went over some rules. No TV after 8. No sugar after 7. Make sure the front door stays locked. Don't answer the door for anyone. Most of it was pretty standard stuff I had heard from other parents before. But then she said something that stood out to me. She pointed toward a door near the back of the kitchen and told me very clearly that it was the basement door and that I should not go down there for any reason. She said the door stays locked and that there was nothing down there I would need. She repeated it 2 more times, staring right at me, making sure I understood. She said it in a tone that felt more like a warning than a rule. I nodded and said I understood, but honestly it struck me as a little weird. I had babysat for plenty of families and no one had ever made such a big deal about a basement before. But I didn't think too much of it. Some people are just particular about their space. Mr. Henderson came downstairs right after that. He was tall, wearing a suit, and he seemed much more relaxed than his wife. He smiled at me, thanked me for coming on short notice, and told me to help myself to anything in the fridge. Mrs. Henderson grabbed her coat and purse, gave the kids quick kisses on the head, and then they both headed out the front door. I watched through the window as their car pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the dark road. And just like that, I was alone in this huge, unfamiliar house with two kids I had just met. The house felt very quiet once they left. I walked back into the living room and sat down on the couch with Emma and Jacob. The movie was still playing. I tried to make small talk, asking them about school and what they wanted for Christmas, but they both gave short answers and kept their eyes on the screen. Everything seemed perfectly normal. I had no idea that in just a few hours, I would be hiding in a locked bedroom, terrified for my life, wondering if we were going to make it through the night. The first 30 minutes after the Hendersons left were completely normal. I sat on the couch with Emma and Jacob, watching the end of their Christmas movie. It was one of those classic animated films about Santa Claus that I had probably seen 100 times as a kid. Emma seemed really into it, laughing at the funny parts and singing along to the songs. Jacob was quieter, scrolling on a tablet while occasionally glancing at the TV. I tried to use that time to get to know them a bit. I asked Emma about her favorite things, what she liked to do at school, if she was excited for Christmas break. She answered in short sentences, mostly focused on the movie. Jacob barely acknowledged me at all. He just kept his eyes on whatever game he was playing on the tablet. I wasn't too worried about it. Some kids take a while to warm up to new people, and I figured once they got more comfortable with me, they would open up. The movie ended around 6:45, and I suggested we play a game or do something fun before bedtime. Emma wanted to show me her toys, so we went upstairs to her room. Jacob stayed downstairs on the couch, still glued to his tablet. Mrs. Henderson had said he could have screen time until 8:30, so I let him be. Emma's room was at the end of the hallway on the second floor. It was decorated in pink and purple, with stuffed animals everywhere and drawings taped to the walls. She pulled out a bin of dolls and started showing me each one, telling me their names and their stories. I sat on the floor with her and tried to seem interested, even though my mind kept wandering. That's when I started to notice how quiet the house was. I mean, I knew it would be quiet because there were only 3 of us and it was a big house, but this felt different. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. I could hear every little sound. The hum of the heater kicking on. The creak of the floorboards when I shifted my weight. The faint sound of Jacob's tablet game coming from downstairs. After about 15 minutes of playing with Emma, I told her I was going to check on her brother. She nodded and kept playing with her dolls, completely content. I walked back down the hallway toward the stairs, and that's when I noticed something that made me pause. There was a door across from Emma's room that I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly open, maybe an inch or two, and inside it was completely dark. I remembered Mrs. Henderson showing me the upstairs bathroom and Emma's room and Jacob's room, but she hadn't mentioned this door. I assumed it was probably just a closet or a storage room. I stood there for a second, staring at it. I don't know why, but something about it felt off. Maybe it was just the darkness inside, or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't noticed it earlier. I reached out and pulled the door closed, hearing it click shut. Then I went downstairs. Jacob was still in the same spot on the couch. I asked him if he needed anything, and he shook his head without looking up. I walked into the kitchen to get myself some water. The kitchen was huge, with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Everything was so clean it almost looked like no one actually used it. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water from the fridge dispenser. As I was drinking, I glanced over at the basement door that Mrs. Henderson had been so insistent about. It was closed, just like it had been when she showed me earlier. But something about it caught my attention. The door wasn't flush with the frame. There was a small gap, maybe half an inch, like it hadn't been closed all the way. I walked over to it slowly and stared at that gap. Mrs. Henderson had said the door was locked. She had said it multiple times. But if it was locked, why wasn't it closed properly? I reached out and tested the doorknob. It turned. The door wasn't locked at all. My stomach did a small flip. Maybe Mrs. Henderson had forgotten to lock it before she left. Or maybe she just said it was locked to make sure I wouldn't go down there. Either way, it made me uneasy. I pulled the door closed firmly, making sure it latched this time. I even tested the knob again to make sure it was shut tight. It was. I told myself I was overthinking it and went back to the living room. It was almost 7:30 by then. I suggested we have a snack before bed, and Emma came running down the stairs when she heard me mention it. I found some crackers and apple slices in the fridge and set them out on the kitchen table. Both kids sat down and ate quietly. Emma kicked her feet under the table and hummed to herself. Jacob scrolled through his tablet with one hand while eating with the other. While they were eating, I walked around the first floor a bit, just to get more familiar with the layout. The living room connected to a dining room, which connected to the kitchen. There was a hallway off the living room that led to a guest bathroom and what looked like a home office. Everything was neat and organized.
No clutter anywhere.
It almost felt sterile. I walked back toward the living room and stopped in the doorway. The basement door was open again. Not wide open, but definitely not closed like I had left it. The same small gap was there, and I could see darkness beyond it. My heart started beating a little faster. I knew I had closed that door. I had made sure it latched. There was no way it just opened on its own. Unless the latch was broken or the door frame was uneven and it didn't catch properly. That had to be it. I walked over to the door again, more annoyed than scared at this point. I pulled it closed hard this time, really making sure it latched. I even stood there for a few seconds, watching it, making sure it stayed shut. It did. I went back to the kitchen where the kids were finishing their snacks. Emma asked if she could have a cookie, and I told her no because Mrs. Henderson had said no sugar after 7. She pouted a little but didn't argue. Jacob put his plate in the sink without being asked, which I appreciated. It was almost 8 p.m., so I told Emma it was time to get ready for bed. She groaned but didn't fight me. We went upstairs and I helped her brush her teeth and change into fresh pajamas. She climbed into bed and asked if I could read her a story. I grabbed a picture book from the shelf and sat on the edge of her bed, reading through it while she listened with her eyes half closed. By the time I finished, she was already starting to doze off. I turned on her night light, a small lamp shaped like a star, and told her good night. She mumbled something I couldn't quite hear and rolled over, hugging a stuffed bunny. I left her door cracked open a little, the way Mrs. Henderson had instructed, and walked back downstairs. Jacob was still on the couch. I told him he had 30 more minutes before bed, and he nodded without looking up. I sat down in the armchair across from him and pulled out my phone. I texted my mom to let her know everything was going fine. She replied almost immediately, asking if I needed anything. I told her I was good. That's when I heard it. A faint creaking sound, like a door slowly opening. I looked up from my phone and my stomach dropped. The basement door was open again. This time it was open wider, maybe 6 inches, enough that I could see the top of the wooden stairs leading down into darkness. I stood up quickly and walked over to it. My hands were shaking a little as I reached for the door. I pulled it closed again, harder this time, almost slamming it. The sound echoed through the quiet house. Jacob looked up from his tablet and asked if I was okay. I forced a smile and told him everything was fine, that the door just wasn't staying closed. But everything wasn't fine. Doors don't just open on their own 3 times in a row. Something was wrong with that door, or something was wrong with this house. I stood there staring at the closed basement door, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to convince myself that there was a logical explanation. I didn't know it yet, but that door opening was just the beginning. At 8:30, I told Jacob it was time for bed. He actually didn't argue, which surprised me. He just turned off his tablet, said good night in a quiet voice, and headed upstairs. I followed him to make sure he brushed his teeth and got into bed. His room was across the hall from Emma's, decorated with posters of superheroes and a shelf full of books. He climbed into bed and I asked if he needed anything. He shook his head and rolled over to face the wall. I turned off his main light and left his door cracked open just like Emma's. Then I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. The house was completely silent now except for the occasional creak of the old wood settling. Both kids were in bed. Everything should have felt calm and under control. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been building since the basement door kept opening. I walked back downstairs slowly, my footsteps sounding too loud in the quiet house. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the first thing I did was look at the basement door. It was still closed. Thank God. I went into the living room and sat down on the couch, trying to relax. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through social media, but I couldn't really focus on anything. My eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen, toward that basement door. I kept expecting to see it standing open again. About 20 minutes passed. I was starting to feel a bit more at ease when I heard a small voice from upstairs. It was Emma. She was calling for me. Not in a scared way, just a normal kid voice asking if I could come up. I set my phone down and climbed the stairs. When I got to her room, she was sitting up in bed, holding her stuffed bunny. Her night light cast soft shadows across the walls. She looked at me with big, sleepy eyes and said she couldn't fall asleep yet. I asked her if she needed water or if something was bothering her. She shook her head and patted the bed next to her, like she wanted me to sit down. I sat on the edge of her bed and asked her what was wrong. That's when she said something that made my blood run cold. She told me her friend wanted to meet me. At first, I thought she meant a friend from school or a neighbor kid. So I smiled and said that was nice, thinking she was just talking about having a playdate or something. But then she clarified. She said her friend who lives in the basement. She said it so casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I felt my smile fade. I tried to keep my voice light and asked her what she meant by that. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, I told myself. That's probably all this was. Just a game she was playing. Emma looked at me very seriously and explained that her friend lives downstairs in the basement and that he comes up sometimes at night. She said he was nice most of the time but that he got sad when people didn't say hello to him. She said he had been asking about me all day, wondering who the new babysitter was. My throat felt tight. I asked her what her friend's name was, trying to play along like this was just pretend. She thought about it for a second and then said she didn't know his real name. She just called him her friend. She said he told her not to tell anyone else about him because grown-ups don't understand. I forced myself to stay calm. I told Emma that there was no one in the basement, that maybe she had just been having dreams about someone being down there. But she shook her head firmly. She insisted he was real. She said he talked to her through the vents in her room. She pointed to the air vent near the floor on the wall opposite her bed. She told me that late at night, she could hear him whispering through the vent. He would tell her stories and ask her questions about her day. She said he knew everything about the family because he had been living in the basement for a long time, even before they moved into the house. Every word she said made my skin crawl more. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to believe this was just a child's imagination running wild. But the way she described it, with so much detail and such certainty, made it feel real to her. And that scared me. I asked her what her friend looked like. Emma scrunched up her face, thinking. She said she had never actually seen him, only heard his voice. But she knew he was tall because his shadow was long when it appeared under her door at night. She said his footsteps were heavy and slow when he walked around upstairs after everyone went to bed. My heart was pounding now. I asked her if she had told her parents about this friend. She nodded and said she had tried, but they didn't believe her. They told her it was just her imagination and that she needed to stop making up stories. So she stopped talking about it. But he was still there. He was always there. I tried to change the subject, tried to tell her it was time to sleep and that everything was okay. But she grabbed my hand with her small fingers and looked right into my eyes. She told me I needed to be careful because her friend gets angry when people don't believe in him. She said he didn't like it when Mrs. Henderson told people the basement was locked. She said that made him upset. Then she said something that made my entire body go cold. She told me her friend had been watching me since I arrived. He saw me close the door on him 3 times. And now he wanted to come upstairs to introduce himself. I pulled my hand away gently and stood up from the bed. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told Emma she needed to go to sleep and that there was nothing to worry about. But my hands were shaking. She lay back down and pulled her blanket up to her chin, still staring at me with those big eyes. She whispered one more thing before I left the room. She said her friend told her I seemed nice and that he hoped I wouldn't be scared of him. She said he just wanted someone to talk to because he got lonely down there in the dark. I walked out of her room quickly and closed the door most of the way, leaving just a small crack like Mrs. Henderson had instructed.
I stood in the hallway with my back against the wall, trying to catch my breath.
My mind was racing.
Kids make things up all the time.
Imaginary friends are normal. But something about the way Emma described it felt too detailed, too specific. And the timing of it, right after that basement door kept opening on its own, made everything feel connected somehow. I looked down the hallway toward the stairs. I could see the faint glow of the living room light from down below. Everything looked normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong in this house. I walked over to Emma's door and pressed my ear against it, listening. I could hear her breathing softly, like she was already falling asleep. Then I heard something else. A faint sound, almost like a whisper, but I couldn't make out any words. It was coming from inside her room. I pushed the door open slightly and peeked in. Emma was curled up on her side, eyes closed, completely still. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of her nightlight. But then I heard it again.
A whisper.
And it was coming from the air vent on the floor. I stepped into the room slowly and walked over to the vent.
Ik knelt down en put my ear close to it, holding my breath.
For a few seconds, there was nothing. Just silence. And then I heard it clearly. A voice. Low and raspy, barely audible, but definitely there. It sounded like someone was whispering from far away, deep below the house. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound of it made every hair on my body stand up. I backed away from the vent quickly and left Emma's room, closing the door behind me. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. I stood in the hallway trying to rationalize what I had just heard. Maybe it was the heating system. Maybe it was pipes settling or air moving through the vents. Old houses make all kinds of noises. That's all it was. It had to be. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Because whatever I heard coming through that vent didn't sound like a house settling. It sounded like a person. And that person was somewhere below me, in the darkness of the basement, whispering up through the vents into a little girl's bedroom. I walked back downstairs on shaking legs, and the first thing I did was look at the basement door. It was open again. Wide open this time, all the way, the dark staircase fully visible leading down into nothing but blackness. And I knew without a doubt that I hadn't opened it.
He stood frozen at the bottom of the stair, staring at the wide-open basement door.
My hands were trembling and my mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts at once. Part of me wanted to run straight out the front door and call my mom to come get me immediately. But I couldn't just leave 2 kids alone in this house, especially not after what Emma had just told me.
He forced myself to walk over to the basement door one more time.
I didn't look down the stairs into the darkness. I couldn't. I just grabbed the door handle and slammed it shut as hard as I could. The sound echoed through the entire first floor. I stood there with my hand on the knob for a full minute, as if my grip alone could keep it closed. When I finally let go and stepped back, I watched the door carefully. It stayed shut. I counted to 30 in my head. Still closed. I backed away slowly and went into the living room, keeping my eyes on the kitchen doorway so I could see if the door opened again. I sat down on the couch and realized I was breathing too fast. I tried to calm myself down. I needed to think rationally. Doors don't open by themselves. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the house was unlevel. Maybe the door frame was warped. Maybe there was a draft somehow. These were all things that could cause a door to swing open on its own.
And the voice in the vent.
That could have been anything. Sound travels in strange ways through old houses. It could have been the wind outside. It could have been the furnace. I was probably just scaring myself because Emma had put those ideas in my head with her story about her imaginary friend. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was 9:15. Only 2.5 more hours until the Hendersons came home. I could do this. I just needed to stay calm and keep myself occupied. Mrs. Henderson had left a baby monitor on the kitchen counter. She told me I could turn it on if I wanted to hear if the kids woke up or called for me. I hadn't bothered with it earlier because both kids seemed fine and their doors were open. But now, sitting alone in the living room, I thought it might be a good idea to turn it on. At least then I could hear if anything was happening upstairs without having to keep going up and down to check on them. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed the monitor, and brought it back to the couch with me. It was one of those older models with a small speaker and an on-off switch. I turned it on and immediately heard static, followed by the faint sound of Emma's nightlight humming in her room. Everything sounded normal. I turned on the TV to distract myself and found a Christmas movie that was already halfway through. I kept the volume low so I could still hear the baby monitor. For a while, everything was quiet. The movie played. The monitor hummed softly. The house felt still. Around 9:30, I started to relax a little. Maybe I had been overreacting. Maybe everything really was fine and I had just let my imagination get the best of me. I was about to get up and grab a snack from the kitchen when I heard something come through the baby monitor. At first, I thought it was just more static. But then it got louder. It sounded like interference, like when a radio station isn't tuned in properly. I picked up the monitor and turned up the volume slightly. The static continued for a few more seconds and then stopped abruptly. What followed was silence. Complete silence. Not even the sound of Emma's nightlight anymore. Just dead air. And then I heard footsteps. Not loud, but definitely there. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They were coming through the monitor clearly. Someone was walking. My first thought was that one of the kids had gotten out of bed. Maybe Jacob was going to the bathroom. But these footsteps didn't sound like a child's. They were too heavy. Too slow. Each step made a distinct creaking sound, like someone putting their full weight on old floorboards. I stood up from the couch, still holding the monitor, and listened carefully. The footsteps continued. They weren't quick or hurried. They were methodical, like someone pacing back and forth. I counted the steps in my head. 5 steps one direction. A pause. 5 steps back. My heart started pounding again. I muted the TV completely and focused entirely on the monitor. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard a new sound. A dragging sound. Like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I felt my stomach drop. I needed to check on the kids. Right now. I ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, still holding the baby monitor. When I reached the 2nd floor, everything was dark and quiet. Both bedroom doors were still cracked open exactly how I had left them. I went to Jacob's room first and pushed the door open slowly. He was in bed, completely still, facing the wall. His breathing was deep and steady. He was fast asleep. I backed out quietly and went to Emma's room. She was also asleep, curled up under her blankets with her stuffed bunny. Both kids were fine. They were both in their rooms, both asleep. So where were those footsteps coming from? I stood in the hallway between their 2 rooms, holding the monitor up to my ear. The dragging sound had stopped. Now there was just silence again. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing. It was coming through the monitor, low and raspy, like someone was standing right next to the receiver. I looked down at the monitor in my hand, my fingers shaking. The receiver was in Emma's room. I had seen it on her dresser when I put her to bed. If someone was breathing into it, they would have to be standing right there in her room. But I had just looked at her. She was asleep. There was no one else in there. Unless. I slowly pushed Emma's door open wider and stepped inside. The room was exactly as I had left it. Emma was still asleep in bed. The night light was still glowing softly. Everything looked normal. I walked over to the dresser where the baby monitor receiver was sitting. It was on. The little red light indicated it was transmitting. I stared at it for a long moment, listening. The breathing had stopped. Now there was just static again. I picked up the receiver and examined it. It looked normal. Nothing seemed wrong with it. I was about to set it back down when I heard the dragging sound again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the monitor in my hand. It was coming from somewhere else in the house. It was coming from downstairs. I walked out of Emma's room quickly and went to the top of the stairs. I looked down into the dimly lit living room below. Everything looked still. The TV was paused on a frozen frame. The lights were on. Nothing seemed out of place. But I could hear it. That slow dragging sound. Like something heavy being pulled across the floor. And it was coming from the kitchen. I gripped the railing and forced myself to go downstairs. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stay upstairs, to lock myself in one of the bedrooms with the kids and wait for the Hendersons to come home. But I needed to know what was making that sound. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I could hear it more clearly. The dragging sound was definitely coming from the kitchen. I walked toward it slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I stepped into the kitchen and looked around. Everything was exactly how I had left it. The dishes from the kids' snack were still in the sink. The refrigerator hummed quietly. The lights were on. Nothing was out of place. Except for the basement door. It was open again. Not just cracked. Fully open. And the dragging sound was coming from down there. From the darkness below. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, staring at that open door, listening to the sound of something being dragged across the basement floor. Back and forth. Slow and deliberate. Like someone was moving furniture. Or something else. The baby monitor in my hand crackled with static. And then, through the speaker, I heard it. A voice. Low and raspy, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. It said my name. Sarah. I dropped the monitor. It hit the floor with a loud crack, and the speaker went dead. The dragging sound stopped immediately. Everything went silent. I stood there in the kitchen, frozen, staring at the open basement door. The silence was somehow worse than the sounds. Because now I knew for certain that something was down there. Something that knew my name. Something that had been waiting for me. And it wanted me to know it was there. I grabbed my phone from my pocket with shaking hands and immediately pulled up Mrs. Henderson's contact. I needed to call her right now. I needed to tell her about the sounds, about the basement door that kept opening, about Emma's story, about the voice on the monitor. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went straight to voicemail. Mrs. Henderson's cheerful recorded voice told me to leave a message after the beep. My throat was so tight I could barely speak. I managed to say that it was Sarah and that I needed her to call me back as soon as possible. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the panic in it. I hung up and stared at the screen, waiting for her to call back. Maybe she was in a loud restaurant and didn't hear the phone. Maybe she had it on silent. I waited 30 seconds. Nothing. I called again. This time it didn't even ring. It went straight to voicemail immediately, like her phone was turned off or out of service. That didn't make sense. Why would she turn off her phone when she had a babysitter watching her kids? I left another message, this time more urgent, telling her something strange was happening and I really needed to talk to her. I hung up and tried Mr. Henderson's number next. Mrs. Henderson had written both of their numbers on the emergency list on the refrigerator. His phone rang 4 times and then went to voicemail too. A generic automated voice told me the person I was trying to reach was unavailable. My hands were trembling as I left a message for him as well. I said I was the babysitter and that I needed one of them to call me back right away. I tried to sound calm but firm. I didn't want to scare them, but I needed them to understand this was important. I hung up and walked back into the living room, keeping my distance from the kitchen and that open basement door. I sat down on the couch and stared at my phone, willing it to ring. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then 5. Nothing. I called Mrs. Henderson again. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message this time. I just hung up and tried Mr. Henderson. Same thing. Voicemail. A sick feeling was growing in my stomach. This wasn't normal. Even if they were at a party and couldn't hear their phones, at least one of them should have their phone on. They had 2 young kids at home with a babysitter they had just met for the first time. Any responsible parent would keep their phone accessible. I decided to try texting instead. Maybe they would see a text even if they couldn't answer a call. I opened my messages and typed quickly to Mrs. Henderson. Hi, this is Sarah. Something weird is happening with the basement door and I'm hearing strange sounds. Can you please call me when you get this? I hit send and watched the message. It showed as delivered. Good. At least the text went through. I sent a similar message to Mr. Henderson. Also delivered. I sat there staring at my phone, waiting for the 3 dots to appear that would show someone was typing back. I waited for 5 minutes. Nothing. I refreshed the conversation. Still nothing. The house felt different now. Bigger somehow. Emptier. The walls seemed to stretch farther away. Every shadow looked darker. Every sound seemed amplified. I was hyper-aware of every creak, every hum, every tiny noise. I tried calling my mom next. At least she would answer. At least she could tell me what to do. The phone rang 3 times and then she picked up. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. But before I could say anything, I heard loud music and voices in the background. She was at her book club, which she had mentioned before she dropped me off. She asked if everything was okay, and I tried to explain, but the noise on her end was too loud. She kept saying she couldn't hear me. I raised my voice and told her something was wrong at the house, but she must have only caught part of it because she said if it was an emergency I should call 911, and if not, she would call me back in an hour when she was heading home. Before I could protest, the line cut out. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. Her phone must have died or she put it away. I wanted to scream in frustration. I looked at the time. It was 9:52. The Hendersons weren't supposed to be home until midnight. That was still over 2 hours away. 2 hours alone in this house with whatever was in the basement. I tried calling Mrs. Henderson again. Straight to voicemail. I was starting to feel desperate now. I tried Mr. Henderson. Same thing. I checked my text messages. Both messages still showed as delivered, but neither had been read. No response. I scrolled through the emergency contact list on the refrigerator that Mrs. Henderson had left. There was a neighbor's number listed at the bottom. Maybe I could call them. Maybe they could come over or at least give me information about the house or the family. I dialed the number with shaking fingers. It rang 6 times and then went to an answering machine. An elderly woman's voice said they weren't home and to leave a message. I hung up without saying anything. What would I even say? That I was the babysitter next door and I thought there might be something in the basement? I felt completely and utterly alone. I was in the middle of nowhere in a house I didn't know, with 2 sleeping kids upstairs and something unexplainable happening around me. And I had no way to reach anyone who could help. I tried the Hendersons one more time each. Both went straight to voicemail. I didn't bother leaving more messages. It was clear they either couldn't or wouldn't answer. I sat back down on the couch and put my head in my hands. My mind was racing. Should I call the police? And tell them what? That a door kept opening and I heard sounds on a baby monitor? They would think I was a paranoid teenager wasting their time. I had no proof of anything. Nothing had actually happened. No one had tried to hurt me or break in. I had just heard some sounds and seen a door open. But Emma's story kept playing in my head. Her friend in the basement. The voice through the vent. The way she said he had been watching me. The way she said he wanted to meet me. I looked toward the kitchen. From where I sat, I could see the edge of the basement doorway. I couldn't see if the door was still open or not from this angle. Part of me didn't want to know. But I forced myself to stand up. I needed to close that door again. I couldn't just leave it open all night. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, my footsteps sounding too loud on the hardwood floor. When I reached the doorway and looked inside, my heart nearly stopped. The basement door was closed. Completely closed. I had left it standing wide open less than 10 minutes ago. And now it was shut. I hadn't closed it. I had been in the living room the entire time. There was no way I could have closed it without walking into the kitchen. Which meant someone else had closed it. Or something else. I stood there staring at that closed door, and for the first time all night, I felt genuine terror. Not just fear or uneasiness, but real deep terror that made my whole body feel cold. Because if something had closed that door, it meant something had come up from the basement while I was sitting in the living room. It meant something was up here now. On the same floor as me. I backed away from the kitchen slowly, my eyes never leaving that basement door. I went back to the couch and grabbed my phone again. I tried Mrs. Henderson one more time, even though I knew it was pointless. Straight to voicemail. I was completely on my own. No parents to call back. No one to help me figure out what was happening. Just me, 2 sleeping kids upstairs, and something in this house that was making itself known. And I still had 2 more hours until the Hendersons came home. 2 more hours of being trapped in this place with no one to call, no one to help, and no way out. The isolation of it hit me like a physical weight. I was truly alone. And whatever was happening here, I was going to have to face it by myself. I spent the next 15 minutes sitting on the couch in complete silence, just staring at my phone and listening to every sound in the house. The heater would kick on and off. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, a pipe made a soft creaking noise. Every single sound made me jump. I kept checking my phone, refreshing my messages, hoping the Hendersons would finally respond. Nothing. The text still showed as delivered but not read. I thought about calling 911 at least 3 times, but each time I talked myself out of it. What would I even say? I had no proof of anything dangerous. Just a door that wouldn't stay closed and some sounds that could be explained away. But I couldn't explain away that voice on the baby monitor. The one that said my name. I tried to focus on the TV. Some old holiday movie was playing, but I couldn't tell you what it was about. The images moved across the screen, but I wasn't actually watching. My attention was split between my phone and the kitchen doorway, waiting for something to happen. Around 10:15, I decided I needed to check on the kids again. I hadn't heard anything from upstairs, and the baby monitor I had dropped was broken, so I had no way of knowing if they were okay unless I physically went up there. I stood up from the couch, my legs stiff from sitting so tensely for so long. I walked to the stairs and started climbing them slowly. Everything upstairs was quiet and dark except for the soft glow coming from under the kids' doors where their night lights were on. I went to Jacob's room first and peeked inside. He was still in the exact same position, facing the wall, breathing deeply. Fast asleep. I crossed the hallway to Emma's room and pushed her door open slightly. She had moved since the last time I checked. Now she was on her back, her stuffed bunny clutched to her chest, her small face peaceful in sleep. I watched her for a moment, making sure she was breathing normally. She was fine. I was about to back out of the room when I heard something from downstairs. a sound that made my entire body go rigid. It was the distinct creak of the basement door opening. That specific sound I had heard multiple times tonight.
The long, drawn-out creak of a linge.
My heart started pounding. I left Emma's room quickly and went to the top of the stairs. From there, I had a partial view into the kitchen. I couldn't see the basement door itself, but I could see the light from the kitchen and part of the hallway. Everything looked still. I listened carefully. Nothing.
No more sounds.
Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after such a stressful night. But I needed to check. I needed to see if that door was open again. I descended the stairs slowly, one step at a time, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. When I reached the bottom, I paused and looked toward the kitchen. I couldn't see the door from where I was standing. I would have to walk into the kitchen to see it. Every instinct in my body told me not to. To stay right where I was. To go back upstairs and lock myself in a room with the kids and wait until morning. But I forced my feet to move. I walked across the living room toward the kitchen, my breathing shallow and quick. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I stopped and looked at the basement door. It was open. Wide open. The door was pushed back against the wall, and the dark staircase leading down into the basement was fully visible. I could see the first few wooden steps illuminated by the kitchen light, and then nothing but pure darkness below. I hadn't opened that door. I hadn't been anywhere near the kitchen for the past 20 minutes. I had been sitting on the couch the entire time, and then I had gone upstairs to check on the kids. No one had opened that door. And yet it stood there, gaping open, like an invitation. Or a threat. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, unable to move. A cold draft was coming up from the basement. I could feel it on my face and arms, a distinct chill that didn't match the warmth of the rest of the house. The air coming from below smelled different too. Musty and damp, like old earth and mildew. I took a small step forward, then another, moving closer to the open door. I don't know why I did it. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to back away, to close the door, to stay as far from that darkness as possible. But something drew me forward. A need to see. To understand. When I reached the edge of the doorway, I looked down into the basement. The first 4 steps were visible, old wooden stairs that looked worn and weathered. Beyond that, there was only blackness. The kind of darkness that felt thick and absolute, like it was swallowing all light. I reached out slowly and felt along the wall next to the door, searching for a light switch. My fingers found it, a simple toggle switch. I flipped it up.
Nothing happened.
I flipped it down and up again.
Still nothing.
Either the bulb was burned out or the electricity to the basement was off. The cold air continued to drift up from below, and I swore I could hear something down there. Not a voice or footsteps, but something. A presence. A sense that the darkness wasn't empty. I was leaning forward slightly, straining to hear, when I felt a small hand touch my back. I gasped and spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. Emma was standing right behind me in her snowflake pajamas, her stuffed bunny hanging from one hand. Her curly brown hair was messy from sleep, and she was looking up at me with those big, wide eyes. My heart was racing from the scare, and I put my hand on my chest, trying to catch my breath. I asked her what she was doing out of bed, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was completely shaken. She didn't answer my question. She just looked past me at the open basement door, then back up at my face. Her expression was neutral. Almost eerily calm for a 5-year-old who had just come downstairs in the middle of the night. Then she said something that made every hair on my body stand on end. She told me he was awake now. She said it in such a matter-of-fact way, like she was commenting on the weather. She said he had been sleeping for a while, but I had woken him up by closing the door so many times. I stared at her, unable to form words. She continued, completely unbothered by my silence. She said her friend wanted to meet me. She said he had been asking about me all night, wondering when I would come down to say hello. She said he didn't like being ignored. My mouth had gone completely dry. I managed to ask her what she meant, even though I was terrified of the answer. Emma turned and looked directly at the open basement door. She pointed down into the darkness with her small finger. She told me he was right there. She said he was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. She said he wanted me to come down. I looked at the doorway, at that impenetrable darkness, and felt a wave of cold terror wash over me. I couldn't see anything down there. Just black. But Emma was staring at it like she could see something I couldn't. She took a step toward the door, and I immediately grabbed her shoulders, holding her back. I told her we weren't going down there. I told her we needed to go back upstairs right now. But she shook her head slowly. She said her friend would be upset if I didn't at least say hello. She said he had been very patient, but his patience was running out. She said he didn't like it when people were rude to him. The way she spoke was wrong. It didn't sound like a 5-year-old child. The words were hers, but the tone was too mature, too knowing. Like someone else was speaking through her. I picked her up, ignoring her protests, and started to carry her away from the kitchen. But as I turned, I heard something from the basement that stopped me cold. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps on wooden stairs. Coming up. Someone was climbing the basement stairs. I could hear each step clearly.
The whole wood creaking underweight. One step.
Then another. Then another. Slow and deliberate.
Getting closer.
Emma looked at me and smiled.
Not a childish innocent smile. Something else.
Something that made my blood run cold. She whispered that he was coming up now. She said he wanted to introduce himself since I wouldn't go down. I didn't wait to hear another step. I turned and ran. I ran through the kitchen, through the living room, and up the stairs as fast as I could while carrying Emma. She didn't struggle. She just rested her head on my shoulder and kept smiling that strange smile. When I reached the second floor, I ran straight into the master bedroom at the end of the hall. I had seen it earlier when Mrs. Henderson gave me the tour. It was the biggest room upstairs with a lock on the door. I rushed inside, put Emma down, and slammed the door behind us. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock, but I managed. I clicked it into place and then stood there with my back against the door, breathing hard, listening. The house had gone completely silent. No more footsteps.
No sounds at all, just heavy, oppressive silence.
And somehow, that was even more terrifying than the sounds had been. Because now I had no idea where it was. Whatever had been climbing those stairs could be anywhere now. It could be right outside this door. And I was trapped inside with no way out and no way to call for help.
Emma sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding her bunny, still smiling that wrong smile.
And she whispered one more thing that made my heart stop. She said he was upstairs now. And he knew which room we were in. I stood with my back pressed against the locked bedroom door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Emma sat on the edge of the master bed, swinging her legs back and forth, completely calm. Too calm for a 5-year-old who should have been scared. The contrast between her composure and my absolute terror was unsettling. I needed to get Jacob. I couldn't leave him alone in his room with whatever was out there in the hallway. But the thought of opening this door and going back out there made me feel physically sick. I stood frozen, trying to decide what to do. Then I heard a soft sound from somewhere in the house. A door closing. Not slamming, just a gentle click. I couldn't tell where it came from. Maybe downstairs. Maybe one of the other rooms up here. The house was so big and sound traveled in strange ways. I made a decision. I had to get Jacob. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to him because I was too scared to go get him. I told Emma to stay right where she was and not to move. She nodded, still with that strange little smile on her face. I unlocked the door as quietly as possible and opened it just a crack, peeking out into the hallway. It was dark except for the faint glow from the night lights in the kids' rooms. Everything looked still. I couldn't see any movement. I couldn't hear anything. I opened the door wider and stepped out into the hallway. The air felt different out here. Colder. Heavy. Like the atmosphere had changed somehow. I moved quickly toward Jacob's room, my feet silent on the carpet. When I reached his door, I pushed it open. Jacob was sitting up in bed, wide awake, staring at the wall. He didn't turn to look at me when I came in. He just kept staring at that same spot on the wall, completely motionless. My stomach dropped. I whispered his name. He didn't respond. I walked over to his bed and gently touched his shoulder. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes looked different. Glassy. Distant. Like he was there but not really there. I asked him if he was okay. He nodded slowly but didn't say anything. I told him we needed to go to the other room, that we were going to stay together for a while. He got out of bed without questioning me, moving like he was in a trance. I took his hand and led him out of his room and back down the hallway toward the master bedroom. As we walked past the stairs, I glanced down at the first floor. All the lights were still on down there, but I couldn't see much from this angle. Everything looked eerily normal. But I knew it wasn't. Something had changed in this house. Something had shifted. I got Jacob into the master bedroom and locked the door behind us again. Emma was still sitting in the same spot on the bed, and Jacob climbed up next to her without saying a word. Both of them just sat there, staring at nothing, while I tried to figure out what to do next. I pulled out my phone again and checked it obsessively. Still no response from the Hendersons. No missed calls. No texts. Nothing. It was 10:43 now. Still over an hour until they were supposed to be home. Every minute felt like an eternity. I needed to keep myself occupied or I was going to lose my mind. I started looking around the master bedroom, taking in details I hadn't noticed before. It was a large room with a king-sized bed, 2 nightstands, a dresser, and a door that I assumed led to a closet or bathroom. On top of the dresser, I noticed several framed photographs. I walked over to them, grateful for any distraction. The photos showed the Henderson family in various settings. Christmas photos, vacation photos, birthday parties, normal family pictures. But as I looked closer, I noticed something strange. In some of the photos, there were 4 people instead of 3. Not just Mr. and Mrs. Henderson with Emma and Jacob. There was another child. A boy who looked to be in his early teens, maybe 13 or 14. He had dark hair and pale skin, and in every photo he appeared in, he stood slightly apart from the rest of the family. I picked up one of the frames to examine it more closely. It was a Christmas photo, probably taken a few years ago based on how young Emma and Jacob looked. The 4 of them were standing in front of a decorated tree. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were in the back, Emma and Jacob in front, and the teenage boy was off to the side. But something was wrong with the photo. The boy's face had been scratched out. Someone had taken something sharp and scraped it across the glass, right over where his face would be. The scratches were deep and deliberate, leaving white marks across the photo. You could barely make out his features underneath the damage. My hand started shaking as I put that frame down and picked up another one. This photo showed the family at what looked like a beach. Again, the teenage boy was there, standing at the edge of the group. And again, his face was scratched out, even more violently than in the first photo. I went through every frame on the dresser. In the photos where the boy appeared, his face was always destroyed. Always scratched beyond recognition. But in the photos that showed just the parents and the 2 younger kids, the frames were pristine. No damage at all. I found one photo tucked behind the others, partially hidden. I pulled it out and felt my blood run cold. It was a photo of just the teenage boy, taken in what looked like this very house. He was standing at the top of the stairs, looking directly at the camera. His expression was unsettling. Not angry or sad, but something else. Something wrong. His eyes were too intense, his mouth set in a line that was almost a smile but not quite. And his face wasn't scratched out in this one. I could see every detail clearly. His dark eyes. His pale skin. The way his hair fell across his forehead. There was something familiar about him, something that made my skin crawl. I turned around to ask Emma about the photos, and my heart nearly stopped. She was standing right behind me. I hadn't heard her get off the bed. She had moved completely silently. She was staring at the photo in my hands with that same eerily calm expression. I asked her who the boy in the photos was. She looked up at me with those big eyes and said simply that it was her friend. The one from the basement. My hands went numb. The frame nearly slipped from my grip. I asked her what she meant. She explained, in that too mature voice, that the boy in the photos used to live in the house with them. She said he was her older brother, but he wasn't supposed to talk about him. Mommy and Daddy said he was gone and that they shouldn't mention him anymore. But Emma said he never really left. He just moved down to the basement. And he stayed there, waiting, watching, listening through the vents. Coming up at night when everyone was asleep. I looked back at the photo of the teenage boy standing at the top of the stairs. Those intense eyes staring out from the frame. And I realized with horrifying clarity that this was real. This wasn't Emma's imagination. There had been another child. A son that the Hendersons had erased from their family photos, tried to pretend didn't exist. But he did exist. And he was in this house. Right now. I set the photo down with shaking hands and looked at Emma. I asked her what happened to her brother. Why did he go to the basement? She tilted her head, considering the question like it was complicated. She said he got sick. Not regular sick. Sick in his head. He started doing things that scared Mommy and Daddy. Bad things. So they locked him in the basement. She said it was a long time ago, back when she was really little. She said they kept him down there because they didn't know what else to do with him. Every word she spoke made me feel more nauseous. I asked her if he was still down there. Emma shook her head. She said he got out sometimes. The lock on the door didn't always work. She said he liked to walk around the house at night when everyone was sleeping. She said he was lonely and wanted someone to talk to. I looked over at Jacob, who was still sitting on the bed, staring at nothing. I asked Emma why Jacob was acting so strange. She glanced at her brother and said he was scared. She said Jacob knew about their brother too. She said the friend didn't like Jacob because Jacob told Mommy and Daddy when he heard noises in the basement. A creak came from outside the bedroom door. A soft sound, like someone shifting their weight on the old floorboards in the hallway. Emma's eyes went to the door. She said he was right outside. She said he had been standing there for a while, listening to us talk. I felt every muscle in my body go rigid. I stared at that locked door, at the small gap between the bottom of the door and the floor. And as I watched, a shadow moved across that gap. The shadow of feet. Someone was standing just on the other side. Emma walked toward the door, and I grabbed her arm to stop her. She looked up at me and said not to worry. She said he just wanted to meet me properly. She said he promised he wouldn't hurt anyone as long as we were nice to him. The doorknob started to turn. Slowly. Testing the lock. I watched in frozen horror as the knob rotated one way, then the other. The lock held. For now. Then came a sound that made my heart stop completely. A voice from the other side of the door. Low and raspy, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakably human. It said my name. Sarah. Emma smiled and said he knew who I was. She said he had been watching me all night through the vents and the gaps in the doors. She said he liked me. She said he wanted me to open the door so he could introduce himself. The doorknob turned again, more forcefully this time. And I realized with absolute terror that the only thing between us and whatever was on the other side of that door was a single lock. And I had no idea how long it would hold. The doorknob stopped turning. Everything went silent. I stood there, barely breathing, staring at that locked door, waiting for something to happen. Emma had walked back to the bed and climbed up next to Jacob, who was still sitting in that strange trance-like state. She acted like nothing unusual was happening at all. I kept my eyes fixed on the door, watching for any sign of movement in the gap at the bottom. The shadow of feet had disappeared. Whoever or whatever had been standing there was gone now. But I knew they hadn't gone far. Minutes passed in suffocating silence. My whole body was tense, my muscles aching from standing so rigidly. I wanted to move to do something, but I was paralyzed by fear. Every tiny sound made me jump. The house settling. The wind outside. My own breathing. Then I heard it. The sound that confirmed my worst fears. Footsteps. Not from the hallway outside the bedroom. These were coming from below. From the first floor. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving across the hardwood floors downstairs. They started near the kitchen area, where the basement door was. Slow, measured steps. Each footfall distinct and purposeful. The sound of someone walking with intention, not wandering aimlessly. I could track the movement by the sound. From the kitchen, through the living room, toward the stairs. My heart started racing. They were heading for the stairs. Coming up to the second floor. Coming up here where we were trapped in this bedroom. I looked around the room frantically, searching for something to barricade the door with. The dresser was too heavy for me to move alone, and I couldn't make that much noise anyway. But there was a chair near the window. I ran over and grabbed it, dragging it as quietly as possible across the carpet to the door. I wedged the back of the chair under the doorknob, creating a makeshift barricade. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. At least if someone tried to force the door open, the chair would provide some resistance. The footsteps had reached the bottom of the stairs now. I could hear them clearly through the bedroom door. One step. A pause. Another step. They were climbing the stairs slowly, taking their time. There was no rush. No urgency. Just steady, patient progress. I backed away from the door and went to the bed where the kids were sitting. I positioned myself between them and the door, as if my body could somehow protect them from whatever was coming. Jacob was still staring blankly ahead, but now there were tears running down his face. Silent tears. He didn't make a sound, didn't sob, just cried quietly while staring at nothing. Emma reached over and took his hand, but she didn't look at him. She was watching the door with that same calm expression, like she was waiting for something she knew was inevitable. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They were on the second floor now, on the same level as us. I could hear them moving down the hallway, the old floorboards creaking under the weight. They were getting closer, heading directly toward the master bedroom. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and tried one more time to call Mrs. Henderson. Straight to voicemail. Mr. Henderson. Voicemail. I typed out a desperate text message, my fingers shaking so badly I had to retype it 3 times. Please call me. Something is in your house. We're locked in the bedroom. Please help. I hit send and watched as it showed delivered, but I knew they wouldn't respond. They hadn't responded all night. For some reason, they either couldn't or wouldn't answer their phones. I was truly on my own. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. I could sense the presence on the other side. Someone standing there, just feet away from us, separated only by a wooden door and a flimsy lock. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps had been. At least when I could hear movement, I knew where they were. Now there was just stillness. Waiting. I stared at the gap under the door, and after a moment, I saw it. The shadow of feet. 2 dark shapes blocking the light from the hallway. Someone was standing there. Completely still. Not moving. Just standing. My breath caught in my throat. I put my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. Jacob's silent crying continued, tears streaming down his face. Emma sat perfectly still, her eyes never leaving the door. Then came a new sound. Breathing. I could hear breathing from the other side of the door. Heavy, labored breathing like someone who had been exerting themselves. It was loud enough to hear clearly through the door. In and out. Slow and deliberate. The doorknob started to turn again. Slowly. Testing. The lock held, but the chair wedged under the knob shifted slightly. I watched in horror as the knob rotated as far as it could go before the lock stopped it. Then it rotated back. Then again. Someone was testing the lock, trying to figure out how to get through. I looked around desperately for something to use as a weapon. There was a lamp on the nightstand. I grabbed it and pulled the plug from the wall, holding it by the base like a club. It wasn't much, but it was something. If that door opened, I would at least have something to defend us with. The doorknob stopped turning. More silence. Then a different sound. Scratching. Someone was scratching at the door. Not aggressive scratching like trying to claw through. Just soft, repetitive scratching. Fingernails dragging across wood. The sound was methodical, almost rhythmic. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It went on for what felt like forever but was probably only a minute or 2. Then it stopped. The breathing stopped. Everything went quiet. I watched the shadow under the door, and after a moment, it disappeared. The feet moved away. I could hear the footsteps retreating down the hallway. I didn't relax. This felt like a game. Like whatever was out there was toying with us. Testing our fear. Seeing how we would react. The footsteps faded, and then I heard them going back down the stairs. Back to the first floor. I stood there holding the lamp, my entire body shaking. Emma finally spoke, her small voice breaking the silence. She said he was just saying hello. She said he wanted us to know he was there. She said he would come back later when we were ready to meet him properly. I wanted to scream at her to stop talking like that, to stop acting like this was normal. But I couldn't find my voice. I just stood there, trying to process what had just happened. Jacob finally made a sound. A small whimper, then a sob. He started crying for real now, not silent tears but actual crying. He said he wanted mommy and daddy. He said he wanted them to come home. He kept repeating it over and over. I want mommy. I want daddy. Please come home. I sat down on the bed next to him and pulled him close, trying to comfort him even though I was just as terrified. I told him everything would be okay, that his parents would be home soon, that we just needed to stay in this room and stay quiet. I didn't believe my own words, but I said them anyway because he needed to hear them. Emma watched us with that unnerving calm. She said Jacob was scared because he didn't understand. She said their friend didn't want to hurt anyone. He just wanted attention. He wanted someone to acknowledge him. He had been down in that basement for so long, alone in the dark, and all he wanted was for someone to remember he existed. The way she described it almost made me feel sorry for whoever or whatever was in this house. Almost. But then I remembered the scratched-out faces in the photos. The way the Hendersons had warned me so severely about the basement. The terror in Jacob's eyes. This wasn't just some lonely person wanting attention. This was something wrong. Something dangerous. I checked my phone. It was 10:47. Still over an hour until the Hendersons were supposed to return. I didn't know if I could last that long. Every minute felt like an hour. The fear was exhausting. My body ached from the constant tension. I told both kids to lie down and try to sleep. Jacob obeyed immediately, curling up on the bed and hugging a pillow. He was still crying softly. Emma lay down too, but she kept her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I stayed sitting up, the lamp still clutched in my hands, my eyes never leaving that door. I listened to every sound in the house. The heater, the wind, the occasional creak of old wood. And underneath it all, I swore I could hear footsteps somewhere below us, pacing back and forth. Waiting. I sat on that bed for another 20 minutes, watching the door, listening to every sound, my whole body rigid with fear. Jacob had finally cried himself to sleep, exhausted from terror. Emma lay next to him, still awake, still staring at the ceiling with those unervingly calm eyes. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed help. Real help. I didn't care if the police thought I was crazy or wasting their time. I didn't care if there was no proof, no evidence of a break-in or an actual threat. Something was wrong in this house, and I needed someone with authority to come here and help me get these kids out safely. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The call connected immediately. A woman's voice came through, calm and professional, asking what my emergency was. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. I told her I was a babysitter at a house on Maple Ridge Road, that I had been hearing strange sounds all night, that someone or something was in the house with us, that we were locked in a bedroom and I was terrified for the children's safety. The words tumbled out faster than I intended, my fear making my voice crack. The operator asked if I had seen an intruder. I hesitated. I hadn't actually seen anyone. Just heard footsteps, heard breathing, saw shadows under the door. I explained this as clearly as I could, telling her about the basement door that kept opening, the sounds on the baby monitor, the footsteps coming up the stairs, the presence outside our door. She asked if anyone had tried to force entry into the room I was in. I told her about the doorknob turning, the scratching on the door, the breathing I could hear through the wood. She asked if the children were in immediate danger. I looked at Jacob sleeping fitfully and Emma staring at nothing and said yes, I believed they were. The operator's tone shifted slightly, becoming more serious. She told me to stay on the line, that she was dispatching police to the address right now. She asked me to confirm the address, and I read it off the emergency list Mrs. Henderson had left on the refrigerator, which I had taken a photo of earlier on my phone. She told me officers were approximately 15 minutes away. 15 minutes. That felt like an eternity. But at least help was coming. At least I wasn't completely alone anymore. The operator instructed me to keep the door locked and to stay away from it. She told me not to engage with anyone who might be in the house, not to open the door for any reason until police arrived. She asked if I had anything I could use to defend myself if necessary. I told her about the lamp I was holding. She stayed on the line with me, asking questions to keep me talking. She wanted to know the ages of the children, how long I had been there, when the parents were expected home. I answered everything mechanically, my eyes never leaving that door. And then it started again. The footsteps. Coming back up the stairs. Slower this time, even more deliberate. Each step seemed to echo through the entire house. The operator heard the change in my breathing and asked what was happening. I whispered that someone was coming back upstairs. She told me to stay calm, that officers were en route, that I needed to keep the door locked and wait. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and started down the hallway, heading straight for us. Again. I watched the gap under the door, and the shadow of feet appeared. Someone was standing there again. I whispered to the operator that they were right outside the door. She told me to stay quiet, to not make any noise, that help was coming. The doorknob started to turn. This time it wasn't slow and testing. It turned forcefully, jerking back and forth. Someone was trying to open the door. The lock held, but the chair under the knob started to slip. I dropped the phone onto the bed and jumped up, grabbing the chair and pushing it back into place, bracing it with my body weight. The doorknob continued to rattle violently. Then came the pounding. Loud, aggressive pounding on the door. Boom. 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 The entire door shook with each impact. Someone was slamming their fist or shoulder against it, trying to force it open. Jacob woke up screaming. Emma sat up but remained silent, watching the door with wide eyes. I held onto the chair with everything I had, pressing my weight against it, praying the lock would hold. The pounding continued, relentless and terrifying.
Boom. Boom. Boom.
I could hear the operator's voice coming from the phone on the bed, asking what was happening, but I couldn't answer. All my focus was on keeping that door closed. The wood around the lock was starting to crack. I could see small splinters forming. The door wasn't going to hold much longer. Jacob was crying hysterically now, and I screamed at both kids to get behind me, to get as far from the door as possible. Emma pulled Jacob off the bed and they both pressed themselves against the far wall while I continued to brace the chair. The pounding grew more violent. The entire frame was shaking. I could hear the wood cracking, see the door bowing inward with each impact. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Complete silence. The pounding ceased. The doorknob went still. No more movement. No more sound. Just absolute, terrifying silence. I stood there, hands still gripping the chair, breathing hard, waiting for it to start again. But nothing happened. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Still nothing. The shadow under the door disappeared. The presence was gone. But I didn't trust it. This felt worse than the pounding. At least when they were trying to break in, I knew what they were doing. This silence was more sinister. Like they were planning something. Like they were waiting for the right moment. I reached for my phone with one shaking hand, keeping the other on the chair. The operator was still there, asking repeatedly if I was okay. I told her the pounding had stopped, but I didn't think they were gone. My voice was barely a whisper. She told me police were 5 minutes away. 5 minutes. I just needed to hold on for 5 more minutes. I looked at the kids huddled against the wall. Jacob's face was red and swollen from crying. Emma had her arm around him, but her expression was different now. For the first time all night, she looked scared. Actually scared. Not calm and knowing, but genuinely frightened. That terrified me more than anything else. Because if Emma was finally scared, it meant something had changed. It meant whatever was happening had escalated beyond even what she had expected. The house remained silent. No footsteps. No breathing. No sounds at all. Just oppressive, heavy silence that pressed down on us like a physical weight. I kept staring at that door, watching for any sign of movement, any indication of what was coming next. And then I heard something that made my blood run ice cold. Not from the hallway. Not from downstairs. From inside the room. Behind me.
A soft creaking sound. Like a door slowly opening.
I spun around and saw what I had missed before. The master bedroom had a second door. A door to the bathroom. And that door, which had been closed when we first came into the room, was now standing open. Just a crack. Maybe an inch. But definitely open. And through that gap, I could see darkness. And in that darkness, I could see something moving.
A shadow.
A shape. Something that had been in the bathroom the entire time we had been locked in this room.
We weren't alone.
We had never been alone. And whatever had been in there had been waiting patiently for the right moment. And now, with the pounding stopped and my attention divided, it was ready to come out. Emma saw it too. She grabbed Jacob tighter and whispered something I could barely hear. She said he had found another way in. She said he had been hiding in the bathroom, listening to us, waiting for us to let our guard down. The bathroom door started to open wider. Slowly. Deliberately. And I realized with absolute horror that help was still 5 minutes away. And we had nowhere left to run. The bathroom door continued to open, inch by agonizing inch. I couldn't move. I was frozen between the bedroom door I had been guarding and the bathroom door that was revealing whatever had been hiding in there all along.
Emma's whisper stilled in the air.
He found another way in. I gripped the lamp tighter, raising it above my head, ready to swing at whatever emerged from that darkness. Jacob's crying had reached a pitch of pure terror. Emma pulled him closer to her, both of them pressed against the wall with nowhere to go. The bathroom door stopped moving when it was about halfway open. The darkness beyond was complete. I couldn't see anything inside. Just black. And then I heard it. That same breathing I had heard through the bedroom door earlier. Heavy and labored. Coming from inside the bathroom. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I stood there, weapon raised, legs shaking, staring into that darkness, waiting for something to emerge. And then I heard the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. Sirens. Faint at first, then growing louder.
Police siren. Getting closer.
The operator on the phone was saying something about officers arriving. Stay calm, they're here. The breathing from the bathroom stopped. The door stopped moving. Everything went still. And then I heard rapid footsteps. Not from the bathroom. From the hallway.
Running footstep.
Someone was running down the stairs, moving fast, like they were fleeing. The bathroom door slowly started to close again. By itself, as if it had never opened. As if nothing had been there at all. Within seconds, it clicked shut, and I was left staring at a closed door, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't imagined it. The kids had seen it too. Jacob was still crying, still terrified. Emma was still holding him, her earlier calm completely shattered. The sirens were right outside now. I heard car doors slamming. Voices.
Heavy boots on the front porch.
Someone pounding on the front door, yelling that it was the police. I ran to the bedroom window and looked down. 2 police cars were parked in the driveway, lights flashing. Officers were at the front door. The operator told me to go downstairs and let them in, that it was safe now. I told Emma and Jacob to stay in the room and not to move. I grabbed my phone, kept the lamp in my other hand just in case, and moved the chair away from the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. When I finally got it open, I looked out into the hallway. It was empty. No one there. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could and rushed to the front door, unlocking it and throwing it open. 2 officers stood there, hands near their weapons, alert and ready. I must have looked absolutely insane. Hair a mess, face streaked with tears I didn't remember crying, gripping a lamp like a weapon. I tried to explain everything at once, words tumbling over each other.
Someone in the house.
The basement.
The footstep. The keys upstairs.
They came inside immediately. One officer staying with me while the other began searching the first floor, flashlight and weapon drawn. The officer with me asked me to calm down and explain clearly what had happened. I took a shaky breath and told him everything as coherently as I could. More officers arrived. 4 in total. They searched the entire house methodically. Room by room. Upstairs and down. I stayed in the living room with 1 officer while they cleared each area. After what felt like forever, they came back and told me the house was clear. No one was inside. But they had found things. 1 officer showed me photos he had taken on his phone. Muddy footprints throughout the house. Coming up from the basement. Through the kitchen. Up the stairs. Down the hallway to the master bedroom. The prints were everywhere, clear as day. Someone had been walking through the house. Someone with bare feet, covered in dirt and mud. The basement door was standing wide open. They had gone down to check and found the basement was finished but empty. Just some old furniture and storage boxes. But there was mud on the floor down there too. And something else. In the far corner of the basement, behind some boxes, they found a pile of old blankets and pillows. Like someone had been sleeping there. Living there. I felt sick. Emma had been telling the truth. Someone had been in the basement. Someone had been living there. The officers asked if the family had mentioned anyone else staying in the house. I shook my head. They had only told me about the 2 kids. They went upstairs and found Emma and Jacob in the master bedroom where I had left them. Jacob was still crying. Emma was quiet. One of the officers tried to ask her questions, but she just stared at him and wouldn't answer. It was 11:47 when they finished searching. I was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had given me, still shaking. They said they would stay until the parents got home. They wanted to speak with them about the situation. At exactly midnight, headlights appeared in the driveway. The Hendersons were home. I watched through the window as Mr. and Mrs. Henderson got out of their car and saw the police vehicles. The look on their faces wasn't confusion or concern. It was anger. They came inside and Mrs. Henderson immediately started demanding to know what was going on, why there were police in her house. One of the officers explained that I had called 911 reporting an intruder and that they had found evidence someone had been in the basement. Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, yes, but also something else. Fear. She asked the officers if they had found anyone. They said no, the house was empty now, but the evidence suggested someone had been living in the basement. Mr. Henderson excused himself and went upstairs to check on the kids. Mrs. Henderson stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, staring at the open basement door. She looked at the officers and told them it was a misunderstanding. That there was no intruder. That the basement door had a faulty lock and probably just swung open. The officers showed her the photos of the muddy footprints. She stared at them for a long time and then said she didn't know what to tell them. That maybe someone had broken in earlier in the day and left. That everything was fine now. They asked her directly if anyone else had been staying in the house. She said no. Firmly. No one else lived there. Just the four of them. One of the officers suggested they should file a report anyway, given the evidence. Mrs. Henderson declined. She said it wasn't necessary. She thanked them for coming but insisted everything was under control. The officers looked uncomfortable but couldn't force her to file a report. They gave me their card and told me to call if anything else happened. Then they left, and I was alone with the Hendersons. The second the police cars pulled out of the driveway, Mrs. Henderson turned to me. Her voice was ice cold. She asked why I called the police. Why I didn't just wait for them to come home. Why I had made such a scene. I tried to explain about the sounds. The footsteps, the door, everything that had happened. She cut me off. She told me I had overreacted. That old houses make noises. That I had scared her children unnecessarily. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said I wasn't supposed to let him out. She said it quietly, almost to herself, staring at the basement door. I asked her what she meant. Who was I not supposed to let out? She looked at me with hard eyes and said I needed to leave. That my mother was outside waiting for me. I looked out the window and sure enough, my mom's car was in the driveway. Mrs. Henderson must have called her at some point. Mr. Henderson came downstairs and handed me an envelope. He said it was the money they owed me, plus extra for my trouble. He said they wouldn't be needing my services anymore. His voice was polite but firm. I was being dismissed. I took the envelope and walked out without another word. My mom asked me if I was okay, and I just nodded, unable to speak.
We drove home in silence.
The Hendersons never explained what Mrs. Henderson meant. They never called me again. And I never asked for an explanation because part of me didn't want to know. But 3 weeks later, I ran into a woman at the grocery store who lived on Maple Ridge Road, a few houses down from the Hendersons. She recognized me and asked if I was the girl who had been babysitting that night the police came. Word had spread in the small community. I admitted I was. She looked at me with sad eyes and said she was sorry I had to experience that. Then she told me something the Hendersons never had. She said the Hendersons used to have 3 children. 2 young ones and an older son named Marcus. He was 15 when something happened. She didn't know all the details, but the boy had some kind of mental breakdown. Became violent. Dangereux. The family kept him locked in the basement for months because they didn't know what else to do. They were afraid of him but couldn't bring themselves to have him institutionalized.
And then one winter night, something happened down there.
The neighbor didn't know exactly what. But Marcus died in that basement. The family claimed it was an accident. That he had fallen down the stairs. The police had investigated, but nothing was ever proven. The Hendersons buried their son quietly and never spoke of him again. They scratched his face out of every family photo. Pretended he never existed. But the neighbor said strange things had been happening in that house ever since.
Sounds at night. Things moving.
The basement door that wouldn't stay closed no matter how many times they replaced the lock. Some people in the neighborhood believed the house was haunted. Others thought maybe Marcus had never really died. That maybe the family had lied, and he was still down there, hidden away. I don't know which version is true. I don't know if I heard the ghost of a dead boy that night or if there was actually someone living in that basement. All I know is that something was in that house. Something that knew my name. Something that wanted out. I never babysat again after that night. Not once. People would ask me, offering good money, but I always said no. I couldn't do it. Couldn't be alone in someone else's house at night, responsible for children, not knowing what secrets might be hidden in the basement or the walls. The Hendersons moved away about 6 months later. Sold the house and left town without telling anyone where they were going. The new owners renovated the entire property, including sealing off the basement and turning it into a wine cellar. I heard they've never had any problems. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that house. About Emma's calm voice telling me about her friend. About the footprints in the mud. About the breathing through the door. About Mrs. Henderson saying I wasn't supposed to let him out. And I wonder what would have happened if that bedroom door hadn't held. What would have happened if the police had arrived 5 minutes later? What would have happened if I had been brave enough or foolish enough to open that bathroom door and see what was hiding in the darkness? I'm almost 20 now, and I still have nightmares about that night. I still see that basement door standing open in my dreams, darkness beyond it, something waiting at the bottom of those stairs. I still hear Emma's small voice saying he just wants to meet you. To this day, I have never told anyone the full story of what happened in that house.
Not my parents, not my friends, no one.
Because part of me is afraid that talking about it will bring it back somehow. That remembering it too clearly will open some door I managed to close that night. But I know one thing for certain. Whatever was in that house, ghost or person or something else entirely, it was real. And the Hendersons knew exactly what it was. They knew all along. And they sent me into that house anyway, with their children, knowing what was hidden in their basement. That's the part that scares me the most. Not the footsteps or the breathing or the muddy prints. But the fact that parents could knowingly put a 17-year-old girl and their own children in danger, just to keep their terrible secret hidden.
I never saw the Anderson again.
I never found out what really happened to Marcus. And I never want to know. Some doors are better left closed. Some basements are better left locked. And some secrets should stay buried in the dark where they belong.